I'm the public.
Uh, Hello, everybody. We are today very happy because we have a distinguished professor, Anol Bhattacherjee, who will share some insights with us about his book, Social Science, Research, Principles, Methods, and Practices. Professor Anol Bhattacherjee, he has been doing research for many years and has been editors for important journals in MIS and we are very honored to be able to get his insight about doing research and in our field.
Okay, Aurora, before you go any further, I just want to show here, hang on, where is that? I have to find the website here. Professors Charges has this book that you can download from the web. In fact, the impressive numbers about what has already happened about this book. Show, not in this page. Where is it? Or maybe here.
It is in that page.
It is here,
Right
a
here.
little further down. Is it?
457,000 right there, under the book.
Oh,
And
where is it? No, but there's under the book here.
no, here.
No, but there was I think it's here that it shows all the downloads so far.
Yes.
And one of the things that Aurora and I want to commit here, and we also have Professor Guilherme Abitia, whose hand is probably shown there, here, to maybe also commit. We want to have this translated into Portuguese and Spanish
And
as well,
Spanish.
because
Wonderful.
We
yeah.
both are compromised
We're
here.
come right here in front of the
in
camera,
front
so
of-
that's
front
Chilean and Mexican
Latin.
Spanish.
So
otherwise we'll have to delete this before people see, right?
exactly.
And kill the witness.
We will keep our word.
Okay, so this it's an open book, and we even have the book here. We could browse it later if we wish. Well, so yeah, you have Professor Banerjee with us, and
So thanks, Alexandre, because I think this we don't have so many books about methodology in Spanish and properly in Portuguese, and so much related with the MIS field. So Professor Anol, he's in the University of South Florida,
Tampa.
and in Tampa, and he will share a lot of insight. I hope with us today, if we can learn something. So we want to ask you some question about research in MIS. Since MIS is in basically social sciences, so what are the difference between this research in social sciences compared with research in other, hard sciences?
Well, MIS researchers could be seen as a variety, a combination of different kinds of research, which includes social sciences and big data analytics and economics and a variety of other types of work. But what one way in which MIS research is different from other disciplines is the role of technology that plays in our personal lives, in our social lives, in our business lives. And we see the emergence of technology every day, through new applications, mobile applications, Internet of Things, and so that gives us a lot of opportunity for doing research. And if you take one of these technologies and drop it in an organization, it changes the organizational structure and processes. And so those are the types of research that we MIS professors are most interested in.
And how do you think that your book would help students, or maybe doctoral students or master students, deal better with these research problems that we have in the MIS field?
Yeah, before we talk about that, let me talk about how the book started.
Okay.
So about 7 or 8 years ago, when I had a sabbatical semester, I was took some time off and I was visiting South Korea, and had a lot of free time to myself. And I've been teaching this class on research methods for about 12 years now. So the initial years, I had a lot of complaints from students, from my own doctoral students. They would say things like, well, we don't have a current book, the book is outdated, the book is very hard to understand, the book is expensive. And so what I did in my classes back in those days was we did have a textbook that we used, But then I supplemented the textbook with a lot of notes and materials that I prepared for my own students, such as examples on how to code and research examples on MIS and so forth. So when during my sabbatical semester, I thought, well, let's just put those all material together and combine it and create a structured book that students could use. So that was how the book started. It was written for 5 students. Today there are about 500,000 people using it, and that is just the English edition that we track. We don't track any of the other editions. So it has been used in about 220 countries on 6 continents. There are 7 language versions available. Some of the other language versions, the Korean version is very popular, so is the Arabic version. But we don't quite track. We just look at the English downloads, and that is about 500,000.
It's pretty impressive.
Impressive. Yeah,
That actually shows how IT is, or information systems is impacting the world. So a few years ago, this would be an impossible venture.
Yeah, and all of that is through zero promotions. And so, for instance, I don't have a review on Amazon and never really bothered to. It's purely by word of mouth. Someone in Arkansas read the book in university and he found it useful and recommended it to her friends, and it spread in the marketing department, in the sociology department.
But is it in Amazon?
It is available in Amazon. Yes, there is a paperback copy available. It costs $9. Just to cover the cost of printing and distribution, and Amazon charges a royalty fee of $3, and so that's the cost of it.
Because there are still, one thing that I noticed is that there are still students that say, well, but we want the hard copy.
Yes.
And
yes.
in fact, I think it's a good strategy to have a hard copy as well, because there are people that still only take us more seriously if they know that there is a hard copy.
And they want to have it on the shelf.
Yeah.
Some professors probably want to have the books on the shelf, so probably it's a good idea. Yeah. Huh?
Decoration.
Decoration. Yeah. Okay.
Do you find it equally suitable for masters and PhD students?
It was designed originally for PhD students, for my PhD students, and then I realized a lot of other programs were using it for their master's degree. I was traveling in Korea, and they said, we use it in our master's program, and it seems like we don't have a lot of tradition of master's level research in the United States, but in other countries they do. They have master's thesis, and so they take their students through a research methodology course, and they write a thesis, they do some independent research. And so a lot of master's students use it as well.
We here in Latin America basically have Master of Science and Master of Executive.
Yeah.
So in our Master of Science, they have to write books, and some, like in my university, they have to write papers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have several master students here at ConfIRM.
Yeah.
Presenting
In
papers.
fact,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
For one thing that I noticed in Latin America is that we still think the master program is really forming the researchers of the future. It's not just it's like some sort of a attachment to an undergrad studies.
Yeah.
Maybe now we could go to the question about how does it fit MIS specifically?
Well, the book was not really specifically designed for MIS. So the way I teach my class is I try to expose students.
But those 5 students of yours
Yes.
were MIS students.
They were MIS students, yes. But then, I like to expose them to a wide range of research methods, which includes things that are not particularly popular in MIS, like, for instance, ethnography is not very popular.
But should be popular.
Should be, and so, there are obviously a lot of research methods we could learn from other disciplines, like anthropology and others. So I tried to incorporate as many of them as I could. And then there are many other emerging areas of research, like design science research, which is not yet in the textbook, but I would like to add that in the next edition. But apart from that, I think one of the approach I used in this book is sort of what I do in my research seminar. The seminar is usually, it's a first semester seminar. So for doctoral students who are coming in the very first semester, they take my seminar. Most of those students have no idea how to do research. They don't even know what research is and how it's different from what industry people do in R&D sectors. So the book was written mostly for people, not so much for to educate them on research methods, but to expose them to the process of doing research from start to finish, with the idea that method is a part of that process. So if you look at the research, this book, it talks about social science research in general. So we talk about the principles of research, social science, what makes it scientific research, what are the steps in the scientific research method process. So it goes on, it's not just chapter by chapter on survey methods and case methods and so forth, but it talks about the whole research process. Where does it begin? What does it end? How do we write up a research monograph or perhaps a paper? So it tries to provide a overall perspective. And then, and I kind of designed it to be more universal so that it perhaps could benefit more than 5 students in some
It seems
cases.
that it is doing that.
Yeah, and so, obviously now a lot of marketing students use it, and a lot of social sciences, sociology students, psychology
When you
students
say
use
that
it.
you take the focus away from just the method, does that mean that we will, I mean, students that use this textbook would probably get to better objectives or better research agendas?
I think so. I think so. Because if you think about the research process, there's a lot of things to know than just the method. And I mentioned the other day that research usually has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is the formulation of a research problem, defining what a problem is, why is it a problem, is it a significant problem, is it an interesting problem, is it a problem worth studying?
And that tends to be the harder part.
Yes, certainly. So I talk a little bit about that in the book, even though in a traditional research methods textbook you would not see much description about the research problem. Then when you get to sort of the middle section of research about how do we solve that problem, we bring in a whole set of tools which include not just research methods but also theories and so forth. So I talked about the role of theories, I provided examples of theories, and then I went into research methods. In terms of the methods, you have qualitative methods, you have quantitative methods. Now, to be fair, the book is biased towards quantitative methods, and that is because that's what my training is, and that's kind of research I do. There are a couple of chapters
But
on
you only have
qualitative.
2 chapters at the right
Yes.
ends that are really quantitative, right?
Yeah, and then there is one chapter on qualitative research and one on how to do coding and interpreting qualitative research. But I would really like to add more qualitative research and also add design science and other types of research that are being popular in the next edition of the book. And then the end of the research process, how do we write up the research process in a way that demonstrates that A, we have solved the problem that we started with, B, we can communicate effectively with the audience so that they can see that they've learned something about it, and there's a contribution to be demonstrated at the end of the research process. So I talked about the whole research process. So the goal of the book is not just to train people in research methods, but to make them better researchers in general.
Yeah, I have the feeling that mainly we were talking about Hefner's what do you call it's the design science. It also has this perspective of trying to put the method in the middle of the process, but showing that it is only there to achieve something that is, of course, much more important than the method itself.
Yes.
It's a way of doing it. So that's your attempt here. So.
Yeah.
So you also said that one important part of the research process was related with the design of the problem, because
Yes.
you said that sometimes people focus too much on how to do it instead of what they have to do. Can you
Yes.
explain a little more about this process of learning and
Yeah.
understanding the
Well,
problem?
that is probably the hardest part of research. Um, in most of our research programs in the United States, the PhD programs, we train students on how to do research, not how to select problems or what problems to use. And a lot of our students struggle with problems. They don't even see problems. They see technologies, for instance. So they would say, I'm interested in studying IoT, Internet of Things. But if you ask them, what is the problem with IoT? they cannot articulate because they don't have
They have a
exposure,
theme. They have a theme or a subject or.
but they don't know what the problem is. However, if you look at research, why do we do research? Well, we do research to solve problems. Not necessarily to apply a method to do something. It's we are trying to solve a problem. So the problem could be something like, for instance, physicians resist technologies in their hospitals. So how can we solve that problem? How can we help physicians use technologies better or change their perceptions towards technology? Or perhaps, people have a negative attitude towards government and e-government programs and e-government tools. How can we improve that situation and help people become more efficient and effective? How can we change the government's perception to be more open towards citizens' participation in civic processes? So those are examples of problems. Now, if you look at most of these problems, there is no mention of technology, usually. Technology is a tool that can potentially help solve that problem, right? But the problem is bigger than the technology. And I think articulation of the problem is step one of research. Now, since we are MIS researchers, we like to see the role of technology. So we naturally gravitate towards problems that have a technological solution. But having said that,
or eventually problems that are caused by the technology that we generate.
or in some cases,
which you should do more, I think.
Sure, yeah, certainly. But we have to kind of keep in mind that the problem is bigger than the technology. Right. And in many cases, the problem existed far longer than the technology has been in place. Particularly things like governments, they have existed for centuries. Most of the modern technology was evolved within the last 15, 20 years, right? So the problem is far more deeper. The problem is multifaceted. There are people involved in that problem. There are process issues. There could be a lot of other angles to the problem. Now, technology may be part of the solution, but it may or may not solve the problem in its entirety unless you look at the broader picture. And so when you do research, I think we have to kind of, first understand the magnitude of the problem, and then think about, well, what does technology fit in with respect to the problem? Then think about how much of the problem does the technology solve or does not solve? What else do we need beyond technology, right? And that is sort of the research design process that we have to kind of, do before we can even start the process of data collection and data analysis. Well, that comes towards the end of the research. But a lot of what I see is a lot of this initial work is missing in research. And so people kind of take shortcuts, meaning they have a theory, they have a method, so they want to use the theory and the method to do something.
Or they even have a sample and they use it, and then they want to see what they can do with that.
Exactly.
Rather than thinking of the problem first.
And therefore, you would see a lot of the research that we do, we manufacture at the end, it's not particularly interesting to people. Because they don't quite understand what have you solved, what problem did you start with, and what have you achieved. So for instance, a lot of research indicates that technology improves efficiency in the workplace. Well, we kind of know that, right? But that's not particularly interesting. But you have to kind of think about what is the problem here, right? And is efficiency really a problem? Or
what is the problem to which this technology is a solution? Right?
Yes, and I think that is step one of research, and that is something that is not very discussed in our academic circles, in our doctoral programs, certainly in the United States. In my experience, I find that people who have a lot of business experience, who are more older PhD students, they have a view of the problem because they've kind of been dealing with it for a while. So they can say that we have a supply, I struggle with a supply chain problem. We had process issues. We tried to solve it with technology and that did not work. So they have a view of the problem and they could do a much better job in articulating the problem. And then, if you train them with the research methods and the tools and the theories, they can do a better job.
Sometimes the problem is training them with that, because then they think about an old dog not learning a new trick.
And and how you can teach or make the students see, because sometimes the students are not trained to see. They
Yes.
can face the problem, but they cannot put it in words.
Yeah, yeah, that happens, and in a lot of cases, like in this conference, we've noticed that what people thought was the problem was not really the problem, and the problem was lurking somewhere in the neighborhood. A more interesting problem was available, but they kind of didn't quite see it. And sometimes it helps to have a outsider or a different perspective look at the problem and redirect the PhD students. So I would strongly encourage younger people and younger academics and PhD students to work with more experienced people, collaborate with them, particularly with respect to identifying problems and scoping the magnitude of the problem. And then they could bring in their research methods and tools and theories and try to solve that problem.
Yeah, at least it would have the relevance
Right.
there,
And-
and it's crucial for.
And what I'm trying to sort of emphasize here is research is a social process. It's very hard to do it alone because you would struggle to see the problem in its entirety. Sometimes outsiders can see it. Sometimes people with experience, with business experience, can see it. So that level of vision is very hard to get. And so working in teams is certainly the way to do research. And which is why you will see a lot of co-authored, multi-authored papers published in academics.
Yeah, and I think that one interesting thing is that we always see the problems in someone else's work. We
Exactly.
hardly ever find the problems in our own. So that's probably another good reason for you to work in.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is
teams
true that
and-
you can find papers that are very well methodologically speaking, but they absolutely have no contribution.
Yeah.
They use a perfectly
never
structured
identify a
equation
problem.
modeling.
Yes.
They
Yes.
perfectly know exactly, the result.
They
They
follow the
converge
recipe.
alpha, and everything is correct. But at the end, they don't answer any problem.
Mhm.
They just
Or any
use
relevant problem.
every
The
relevant
question
problem.
was, don't.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the technique I use with my doctoral students is I ask them to summarize, because we do a lot of readings of papers in my class. So I usually have one student assigned as a discussant for each paper, and we kind of circle through the students. So I ask them to summarize each paper in one sentence.
That's a good idea.
So what do you learn? And that, you've read the paper, you kind of read it from start to finish, you kind of know what they did. Sometimes they look at the abstract and try to figure out,
Yeah.
but the
Well,
abstract
if the abstract was well written, it would probably be there, right?
probably, and in many cases, the abstract talks about what the problem is and how they did it, but that's not what we are interested in. The objective is to summarize what do we learn in one
Okay,
sentence.
the reader.
And what does the reader take away from it
Yes.
after you strip out all the methods and all the theories and everything else? And that they struggle with it. And a lot of times you would see that they come out with a one line summary that is not very enlightening or not very interesting, which indicates that the research was perhaps not particularly interesting.
Right.
So for instance, a finding could be that, well, a lot of physicians resist computer technology. Well, yeah, that's a fact,
Well.
right? But then why? It may or may not explain that.
Right.
Or even if they say, well, doctors resist technology because they think it's incompatible with their work. And then you could sort of critique that and say, well, is that the entire story? Or is it just a fraction of a story? Will it change if you look at doctors in a different setting, right? So those are, that's a useful exercise trying to kind of distill the paper, because, after you read a paper and you read 500 papers, you only remember one line, right?
Mhm.
Because the rest is all blur.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's very important to practice that art of remembering what that line is that you
Yeah.
will remember, right?
I usually try to do that when I read a paper. I write that on top of it because next time, if I read just what I wrote there, now I remember what it's about. Otherwise, I have to read
And
it
then the difference between an abstract and this process is the abstract is the author's summary of what they did. Here I'm asking for the reader's perspective about what they got from it, which may be different from what the authors got.
Well, the author tries to be a little like a dictator and telling, well, I want you to understand what I'm conveying here. And of course, if they did a good job, that's probably, they'll be happy if the reader got their idea. But it's interesting that, in fact, the reader is the author of their own perception of the paper at the end.
So, and when you have been able to detect the problem and you have been able to just visualize the problem in a way that, you think that this is an interesting problem that needs to be solved in some way. So, I mean, we as a professor, we see that the students wants to go really fast to the stage of taking data. I mean, to the data
Yes.
stage. So how can you avoid the mistake of taking data which is not the way that you're supposed to take? Because we say in Spanish, if you have a hammer, you see everything like a nail.
Everything becomes a nail.
Yeah.
Yes.
So students want to use one method so badly that they just run into it. So how can you?
Well, I've actually seen that in this conference many times, and it's sort of the, you know people do it, and I know they do it. Well, I think this whole idea about rushing to collect data, I think is somewhat premature. I think we have to kind of sort of force students to sort of take a step back, think about it. So I have a series of exercises that I do in my class. Assignments. They are progressive assignments, progressive exercises that leads towards a final proposal paper at the end of the semester. So assignment one is usually define the problem. So I give them a couple of weeks to define a research problem that they're interested in, do some preliminary literature survey to figure out, who has the problem, who else has the problem, what is the size of the problem, the magnitude of the problem. I ask them to see if there are any statistics available, if there are any case examples available of companies that are facing that problem, and so they can talk about that. So so that sort of, partitioning the research into phases, I think it sort of helps cut down on jumping straight to the process of data collection. So that's the first assignment. The second assignment is a more systematic literature review. And sometimes when they do that, they realize, well, what I thought was the problem has already been addressed in the literature. And in that case, we would go back to the drawing board and try to fix the problem, or perhaps change the research question so that we are looking at a slightly different but related problem. So we try to sort of work from the literature, if you go back and forth and try to work. Sometimes
there is some re-engineering there, or
Yes.
going back to the problem, because
Yes.
now you have an interesting problem, but you don't have a method to address it, or
Yeah. The other thing I do in class is, since this is a research methods, a doctoral level class, I try to make it as interactive as possible. So, just like students here are coming and presenting at a conference and taking feedback, well, in my class, students do that all the time. So they would present their research problem, and I would ask other students to kind of critique or sort of provide feedback or comments on whether that's an interesting problem, if it's useful problem, if it's relevant. So we try to get this whole process started early on. So by the time we reach the end of the semester and they are presenting their proposal paper, we have worked out a lot of these details early on. And it's a continuous iterative process. It's an agile process that keeps on changing, and we go back and forth. Some students find it to be very frustrating, because they are thinking, well, I've been working on this for 2 months, and I'm not really headed anywhere. And we as a group, because we have other doctoral students and sometimes we have faculty members, we try to help them, try to reorient them. Initially, the way it works is students would come and tell me, well, I'm interested in cybersecurity. So I would say, well, you have to define a problem in cybersecurity.
What exactly?
Yeah, well, what exactly would you like to study? And they haven't thought about that yet. But this is an opportunity for them to get involved and figure out what kind of research people are doing in cybersecurity, what is the process, and And as I said, if you have a person who has worked in cybersecurity domain for a period of time, he could easily identify problems in cybersecurity. But someone who hasn't would probably struggle and need some help.
I tend to tell my students, what questions do you want to ask yourself about this, rather than cybersecurity?
Yeah, exactly.
And that very much helps. Try to start out with.
Well, just trying to go back now to the book itself. We've
All right.
been talking a lot about how to do research, perform research and everything, which is really great. One problem that I have, and you seem to also face, is this thing of the intangible virtual book. How would you convince? I mean, it doesn't seem that you have to convince anybody having 500,000 people already downloaded your book, but what could you tell students or professors about the quality of a digital book compared to a book on the shelf, because that's a problem that many people usually have. Oh, if it's not printed or if it's not there on the shelf, I don't know if it's good.
Well, first of all, if you read the book, you'll find plenty of typographical errors and grammatical errors, and that's the result of me not having a copy editor to fix it, and I'm not very good at grammar. So that's sort of, I've had people comment, well, there are things that you should correct, and I have a long list of those corrections that I have to do at some point.
But you use the collective intelligence of these people that are
Yeah, I've had people who, send me PDF of the entire book, with changes, with copy editing changes that I should do. And I'm very thankful for that, because that's a valuable service. Having said that, when I was writing the book, obviously my intent was never to make any money from it. It was mostly for my own students, and then other students found it useful, and I said, okay, we'll just put it up on a website. And then when someone found it useful, they kind of recommended it to their friends. And sometimes they send me a little thank you note by email, and I got gazillions of them. And my response is, yeah, if you find it useful, if you have friends and colleagues who might use it, might benefit from it, just recommend it to them. And that's sort of how the book spread. Now, the desire for a book on the shelf is probably stronger amongst people in our generation, not so much among the younger folks. Like, for instance, my PhD students, I don't think they buy the book, my own students. I have never seen them. They just download it on their iPad, and they're reading it, flipping through the pages on the iPad. And I'm thinking, can you really read a book like that? I mean, I would have a problem. I would need a book on the shelf. I would need to highlight. And then my students would go, no, I can actually highlight here too. And they go, so yeah, this is Adobe, I'm highlighting here. I'm adding a comment here. I just added what you just said right here on the book, on your iPad. So I guess technology has advanced to the stage that, a lot of things is possible digitally that was not, it was hard to imagine. But then there is, I figured, well, if there are obviously some people who would need a paper copy, who want a paper copy, so we'll just create a digital copy, a book copy, paper copy, and put it on Amazon. And then I was told, well, you could do a ebook as well. Well, I'm not exactly sure what an ebook is, but I have a PDF copy, which probably not exactly.
Do they have the Mobi copy, the Amazon?
Yes, no, I don't have that.
No,
Even though that was possible, and Amazon does have a service for converting into an ebook, but that never happened.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, Guillermo?
Congratulations.
Well,
And here we're committing that at this time you will have a Portuguese and Spanish.
Wonderful.
I'm obligating him, and he will obligate me.
And we're also we're also connecting Guillermo.
You're the witness.
The witness.
So I think it's going to be very, very good for our students in the whole Latin America, because we don't have many PhD programs in Latin America. But we have Master of Sciences, and mainly they will be, benefit.
I think in a couple of years from now, Portuguese and Spanish will be.
They are the hard medium.
They will be there in that dispute with the Arabic version and what is
the Arabic version is very popular, and yeah, because apparently there are not many Western research methods book in Arabic, and so is the Chinese language version. extremely popular because their methods of instruction is
I'd say
Chinese.
because they're just
But they
that
want to
many
learn
Chinese.
Western research methods. So those are very popular editions, and the Korean version has become quite popular as
Hopefully
well.
the Lakai's versions will also be.
And then
Exactly.
the next step is to add design science.
Yes, then, and there will be an update for my that's my objective for the next sabbatical break that I get. I'm gonna do a major update and try and improve the book.
So besides the design science, there is anything else that are thinking about including in the book?
Yeah, I'm going to try to improve the qualitative research method section.
Oh yeah.
You know, I would like to have more tangible examples of ethnography research, and maybe bring in a lot of classic research from other disciplines, from psychology,
Or
from
even
other domains.
from yes, I would say that if you escape the large journals, if you go to the second tier journals, you'll find a lot of creative thinking and things being done there, not with the same rigor, at least not the same rigor that we expect in our community, but still very good examples of how to do. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
for sharing.
Professor Anol.
Hopefully we'll soon have these two new versions of the
Yes.
book in Portuguese and Spanish.
So
Well,
we
thank
will
you for having
share-
me.
Great, it was good.